Hello chess friends and welcome to Azadov's chess channel and welcome to our French defense series. So in this series I'm going to show you some opening preparations, some opening lines and some strategies in this very nice opening. And in this series I'm going to show you the French defense from both sides, also from white side but also from the black side. Today we're continuing more with ideas for white because in this particular opening I think we should first evaluate the strength to play against the French defense. Then also, as I said, I'll show you some ideas how to play the French defense. And if you want to be familiar more with this opening, check out my playlist on YouTube. It's of course under the name French defense, but it's a little bit different than my usual opening preparations on my YouTube chess channel because the first three videos of this French defense series are videos in which I show you how to play against the French defense, in which I showed you a nice and effective way, I think, to beat the French defense. Then we had this introduction video in which we had the common strategies, and in our first video, basically we started sort of with the normal variation or the so-called Steinitz variation. So today we're continuing with the normal variation of the French defense or the so-called classical Steinitz variation. And today I wanted to show you really great and instructive gameplay by this top engine Leela C0 against Ethereal from the TC/EC season 18. It has been played recently and it shows really the potential for both sides, I think, for black and for white in this very nice and static opening, because as I mentioned in my previous video, so you should really start this series from the beginning. You shouldn't skip you shouldn't skip videos. So please watch this videos really from this introduction video, then part 1, part 2, and so on. I think then you have a better understanding of this particular video that I wanted to show today. So let's again remind us of this common strategies of the French defense. As I said, we have most of the time some close positions in the French defense. We have this directed attacks, so it means after, let's see this common setup of the French defense. So here after the move knight to c3 and knight to f6 and e5, here we have this already this directed attack, which shows us where white should basically attack. On the other hand, black is of course coordinating the attack here on the queen side, because these pawns are showing us really the direction. So here, as I said also in my previous videos, the main tactics in the French defense are happening somewhere here. So there are really some common tactics in the French defense. So most of the times you see maybe from black's perspective some tactics around the square d4 or maybe around the square e5. On the other hand, white will try maybe some tactics here somewhere, maybe on the square e6 or maybe even on f7, but maybe even on d5. So the tactics in the French defense are most of the times happening in the center. So be familiar really with some tactics. Watch maybe some grandmaster games. Watch many maybe this top engine games, which are really great now these days. Stockfish, Leela C0, Allenstein, and many of this now really great engines that we have that we can follow and analyze. So it's been now really great for chess players, I think, recently. So we have now great possibility to have a nice preparation in particular opening. So what is also very important about the French defense is this so-called opposite side attack game, which I also mentioned in my previous video. So as I said, we have this directed attack. We want to, of course, play something like f4, g4 here from white's perspective. From black's perspective, we want to play c5, b5. We want to create some attacking possibilities where we are stronger. So, of course, white is strong on the king side, black is strong on the queen side. So when we have this directed attacks, you should never, but never lose tempos. Tempos are the most important things here. You should always evaluate, can I block my opponent's maybe attack with some moves? Can I slow it down? When you see an opportunity to slow down your opponent's attack, maybe here somehow on the queen side, and maybe get a faster attack here on the king side, then I think you can really have a favorable game. So as I mentioned also in my previous videos, we have most of the times this favorable trades of pieces. So it means from black's perspective, black most of the times has the problems of the light square bishop. On the other hand, white has some sometimes the possibility to lock his own bishop with potential f4 moves. So sometimes white could really have problems with his bishop, with his dark square bishop. So in order to maybe get a better middle game, you should always search for positional trades of pieces. So it means white would maybe love to give up this bishop for this bishop, but black would love to give up the light square bishop for white's light square bishop. So we'll come to that also in this very nice game between Leela C0 and Ethereal, as I said. And as I always mentioned in the French defense, there could be some troubles for you if your opponent stays with the king in the center. The king in the center position is really a nice strategical element in the French defense, so don't be surprised, as I mentioned also in my previous videos, don't be surprised if white or black stays with the king in the center. This is really normal in the French defense because we have this blocked pawn structure in the center, as I showed you here. So here d4 e5, e6 d5. So in order to make something happen, in order to attack the king, the center has to be opened, of course. And now with this close center, it's really a possibility for both sides to stay even with the king in the center. So let's see now this game played by Leela C0. We have again this normal variation, or this classical variation after the move knight to d7. Here played by Ethereal, we have the f4 move, which is the so-called Steinitz variation. There are some possibilities also for white to play knight to e2. We'll analyze also this particular line. Then after the c5, white is trying to cement his pawn structure here with the move c3. So as I said, after knight to d7, we have f4 by Leela c0, and now we have c5. So as I said, black is trying to crack the position simply around this d4 square. Here knight to f3, and now bishop to e7. Here is a line in which black is even trying to castle, because there is now the possibility really to castle. White hasn't secured so far this g4 f5 pawn breakthrough. So far, as I said, the problem of white can be sometimes this blocked bishop on c1, which is blocked out by its own pawn on f4. So this bishop is a little bit locked. On the other hand, this bishop on f1 can come to d3 and will have maybe a great two diagonals. We'll have some great attacking possibilities against this h7 square. So in the game, bishop to e3 played by Leela c0, still keeping this bishop at least active somehow. But if this position stays like this, this bishop could be really problematic. It will happen also in this game, but Leela c0 will solve these positional problems. What you should never do from white's or from black's perspective is to invite your opponent's pieces into the game. So you shouldn't play something like d takes c5 here. Don't do that, because you're activating your opponent's pieces. Basically what we are trying to do in the French defense is to keep the tension in the center. So you should really try to keep this tension in the center. Don't allow your opponent to spread his wings, sort of, to maybe activate some pieces. Here after the move bishop to e3, we have castling played by Ethereal, and we have now queen to d2. So b6, this is also a possibility which I've analyzed, and which was played by Ethereal. There is this idea of blacks, as I said, to trade off these light square bishops. This is really possible because black has the opportunity to play the move bishop to a6 and get rid of his bad bishop, which is of course this bishop, light square bishop, and trade it off for a good white light square bishop. But don't be scared so much from white's perspective immediately, because this idea works in long terms. I think I've analyzed now this variation. Okay, here Leela c0 played the move a3, and after knight to c6, we can play on our common flank attack with h4 g4. But if here bishop to a6 happens immediately, then I think we can simply continue to push g4, because there is this problem of tempos, as I mentioned. You should never lose a tempo. So okay, what black has accomplished here is of course the potential trades of pieces, but black has played already with the bishop once. We'll trade it off again for this light square bishop. So black has played two tempos, And after, even if black manages to do that, still you're basically inviting here white's rook to come into the game. So white will activate his rook into the game without losing any tempos, but black has lost 2 or 3 tempos. So as I said, it's all about tempos in chess, especially when it comes to this closed center positions like this. So after g4, okay, black could even try to simplify the position even further with moves as bishop to h4, but it's not a problem here after potential trades of bishops and trades of bishops again on f1, rook to f1, and knight to c6. Here white can queenside castle, and I really like now white's position, because if we evaluate this opposite side attack games, I think white is simply faster. So that's what I meant. We should always see what this trades of pieces is meaning to us, because now I don't think that black has really a good position here, because f5 will happen eventually in one particular moment of the game. f5 is basically unpreventable. Even if you try to stop it somehow with g6, still we can play f5 and split pawns in front of the king and really open maybe the g or h file. So even if black takes here, c takes d4, we have knight to b5. This pawn is not a problem. Still we can play on our blockade. One of the main ideas, of course, while playing against advanced pawns like this pawn on d5 is to create a blockade. But here also we have now the opportunity to place our knight on a very, very active square on d6. So that's why this b6 idea, you see, is okay in order to maybe simplify the position, but as I said, it has to be prepared more. It can be played maybe in the later stage of the game. So far, I don't think that black has accomplished something. You see, you will still need make some moves like a6 in order to prevent this knight to b5 idea, and still if maybe white continues with some rook to e1 moves, then f5 is the immediate threat. And I think, as I said, white is simply faster and has a comfortable game. So that's why here after the move a3, we have knight to c6. You see, black is also trying to keep the dynamics in the game, to challenge white around this d4 square. As I said, the main battles are happening around the d4. From black's perspective, the main battles are happening around this square e6, pardon me. So in the game h4, played by Leela c0, challenging immediately black with some potential flank attacks. h5, in order to block the position, I don't think it's good, because we can simply play bishop to e2, then knight to g5, and something like h5. And again, I think white is slightly faster in this opposite side attack game, because black hasn't accomplished so far anything on the queen side, hasn't pushed maybe a b pawn, hasn't pushed a c pawn. Still, this king can stay in the center, because as I said, still white's king isn't even endangered here. This h4 is protected by the knight on f3 and this rook to h1, so that's why here h5 isn't a good idea. So in the game, queen to c7, played by Ethereal, and we have now queenside castling by Leela c0. Very brave decision, I think, to castle basically into black's attack. In the game, a6 was played, preventing this knight to b5 idea, or even a positional idea, bishop to b5, with some ideas to maybe give up the light square bishop for the knight and trying to keep the position in the center closed, maybe try to get really a close position. In the game, that's why a6 was played, and we have now bishop to d3. And here comes, I think, the critical moment of the game, in which Ethereal, you see, this is so far a good position for black. Black hasn't made a mistake, and here Ethereal played the move c takes d4. But I think black can take over in the game. Black can play the move c4 here, and I think black is even slightly better, because you have to retreat with the bishop, and now b5 is a serious threat. I think now that black is a little bit faster in the attack, you could maybe try f5 to crack the position, but now b4. You see, the problem is that this attack comes with a tempo on the knight, so you have to take a takes b4, and after bishop takes b4, we have a new position in which white has already troubles. Black can maybe play a5, a4, a3, just in order to open the position somehow in front of white's king, even if we have to sacrifice some pawns, even if we have to sacrifice some pieces. In this opposite side attack games, it's all about opening the position in front of the king, maybe even creating some checkmate threats. I think after bishop to b4 that black is perfectly fine here. So you see Ethereal has played a great opening so far, but missed, I think, maybe this move, c4 to kick away the bishop. Here, maybe queen to e1 would be a possibility, but you see now queen to a5 very, very actively, and now after king to d2 is really a forced move, because basically you don't have better moves. Queen to a2 and now rook to b1. Okay, maybe so far the king is secured, but here after e takes f5, I'm not seeing a good way how white should make progress here, because now you have also worries how to take this pawn. You cannot take the d5 pawn because you're pinned, and as I said, I think that black in this position is perfectly fine. So that's why you see in this opposite side attack games, you should always evaluate the strength of the tempo. Here after the move bishop to d3, as I said, Ethereal had the opportunity to kick away the bishop with a tempo and continue the game with the potential b5 move. But okay, here c takes d4 was played. Again, of course, taking the pawn in the center. We have knight takes d4 and now b5. Okay, so far black has still possibilities to open the position with some b4 moves. We have rook to h3, and this is a great defensive strategy, I think, by Leela c0. It's obvious that something will happen here, maybe on the 4th or 3rd rank. So sometimes I think when we play chess, we forget sometimes really about our rooks. This rook to h3 is a common rook lift defensive strategy which you can apply sometimes, so don't forget about the rooks in your games. I do it myself. I forget about them sometimes. I'm not including them into the games. So here rook to h3, and we have now, I think, again a new mistake by Ethereal. Knight takes d4. So I think that black has again now better choices, maybe to play rook to b8 here, which is now really again the threat to open somehow the b file. Maybe after something like knight takes c6, which would be a natural move here for white. Queen takes c6, and now knight to a2. Okay, so far white has defended, white has prevented maybe this move b4, but even if black sacrifice maybe a pawn here with a5 b5, a5 b4, still there are some opportunities to open the a file or the b file with the rooks, and still I think white could have some troubles in front of the king. Maybe here f6 is also a good possibility for black, because after e takes f6, bishop takes f6, you see we are activating now even our bishop, and if white for instance tries something like g4, then the d4 is very, very annoying, I think, for white to handle. You have to retreat with the bishop, and now the e5. You see, we are simply rolling. Here we have really tempo. We have still tempos. We are attacking white. We are not allowing white to breathe here. And again, I think this is perfectly fine for black. So even if you don't play this move rook to b8, you could maybe go into natural move. Maybe you could play something like knight to a5 with possibilities to play a very powerful outpost on c4. And here I think, as I said, that Ethereal makes really the mistake, takes out the knight. That's what I meant. You should keep the tension in the game. Now it's a move which invites now white into the game. Bishop takes d4, and okay, you have the possibility to push the pawn on b4. After a takes b4, bishop takes b4, but now h5, and again it seems to me that now that white is a little bit faster in the attack. We have h5, bishop to c5, and now great move, I think, by Leela c0, h6. So far, black cannot take the bishop because you're going to be checkmated after bishop takes h7. This is the tactic that Leela c0 has prepared here. After king takes h7, h takes g7, discoverably attacking the king. And now after king takes g7, rook to g3. forcing the king to go on the h file again, and rook to h1 is checkmate. So here in this position, even if you don't take the pawn here after bishop takes h7, maybe you could hide, but again a similar tactic will happen. H takes g7, king takes g7, and now rook to g3, king to h8, and now rook to h1 with again some discovered attack possibilities, and again it's game over. So that's why after the move h6, you see Ethereal didn't take the bishop on d4, simply passed through with the pawn on g6, and we have now bishop to e2. Rook to b8, knight to a2. Very common idea to get this knight somehow into the defense. We don't want this knight to be really an object of black's attack. In the game, bishop to e7 was played, and now you see rook to c3, this defensive strategy to play a rook lift. Now this rook, not that it only is a defensive piece, it's really now also an attacking piece. It can be really changed here on b3, on a3. It has really a great flexibility on the third rank. We have queen to d8, and now a g4. Again, it seems to me that white is now a little bit faster in the attack, because still there are so many pieces protecting white's king, this knight, the rook, and the bishop, the queen also. Still we can improve the position of the king with king to b1, king to a1, maybe rook to b1, and now it's simply time to open the position with some f5 moves. So a5 played by Ethereal. We have queen to e3, and now a4, bishop to a7, rook to a8, and now bishop to b5. This is a very, very important positional move. As I said in the game, here, as I said in the beginning of the video, you have always this positional problems of trades of pieces in the French defense, because the center is still a little bit closed. We cannot make something happen. So what Leela C0 is trying to do here is to give up the bishop for the knight, and then to force bishop trades of our dark square bishop trade, and force basically black to go into a bad endgame with a bad bishop on c8. As I said, in the French defense, most of the times you will have problems with the light square bishops. It's simple like that because of this pawn structure in the center that's immobile. You cannot push pawns here. The bishop is blocked out. You really sometimes have troubles to develop it somehow. So bishop to b5, a great positional move played by Leela C0. We have bishop to b7, bishop takes d7, queen takes, and now bishop to c5. The trades of bishops is basically forced because you cannot move the bishop, you're losing the rook. So here bishop to a6 was played. We have knight to b4, we have rook to e8, and now a very nice move, knight to c6. Here if you take queen takes c6, then we can simply take the bishop and discoverably attacking the queen. So the queen would be forced to move somewhere, maybe to b7, and then we would play something like bishop to d6. This is really an annoying bishop. You don't have any more pieces that can compete with this bishop. You have so many dark square problems. The main idea, I think, for white is maybe to sneak in somehow with the queen here through the dark squares and even checkmate black. So it's not a good continuation, I think, here for black. So that's why after the move knight to c6, Ethereal didn't take this knight, simply retreated with the bishop to h4. So we have now bishop to a3, and I think now that Leela C0 has solved all of the positional problems. You see, this bishop is really cemented. The rook is cemented. Now we can play knight to d4, playing on our blockade idea to play the blockade against this advanced pawn on d5, which is really a common strategy when you play against advanced pawns. The blockade with the knight is really one of the best ways how to make that happen. So here great defensive setup so here by white, and still we have possibilities to finally crack the position with the move f5. So you shouldn't rush sometimes in chess. You see Leela C0 played now many maneuvers, as I said, also that's also a common strategy in the French defense, maneuvers, repositions, improvements of the position of common pieces. So now when we have everything solved on the queen side, when nothing can happen on the queen side, it's really time to strike with the move f5. So rook to c8 was played, knight to d4. We have rook takes c3, queen takes c3, bishop to c4. Although this bishop has a good activity, but it's really aiming into nothing. This bishop is also aiming into nothing. I think that this knight on d4 is really the most powerful minor piece on the board. In the game, we have king to b1, bishop to e7, and now simple, great move f5. Now finally the pawns are rolling. The g file will be opened. If you take, for instance, if you try to trade off too many pawns here, then the g file is open. Maybe we can include the queen on the g file. Even checkmate threats are possible. So here after the move f5, we have e takes f5, g takes f5. Taking, as I said, is not a good choice. You simply lose here the battle on the g file, so it will be a lost game. In the game, bishop to a3 was played by Ethereal, but now e6 played by Leela c0. Now comes the problem. You see, you cannot take. If you take e takes f takes e6 like in the game here, Leela c0 played also f takes e6. The problem is you cannot take with the rook. You will simply take the rook and deflect the queen from the defense of the g7 square. You're going to be checkmated, so the bishop is also hanging, so it's not a good continuation. So that's why here after the move f takes e6, Ethereal played queen to e7, and now Leela c0 played b takes a3. If we evaluate now the position on of minor pieces on the board, again you see it's basically black that has troubles here on dark squares, because white is always threatening this checkmate on g7. So it's black that needs to be careful here on dark squares. If you try something like rook to b8, we can simply hide with our king and stay with the queen and defending for first of all this b2 square, and then we are trying to attack our opponent g7 square. Queen to g5, rook to h1. We want to of course keep our pawn on the board. Very important attacking piece here now in our attacking formation. Queen to g2, we have rook to e1, we have queen to g5, and now queen to f3. So far you cannot take because you get a queen to f7 and you lose the rook, so that's why a rook to e7 was played, and now queen to e3, forcing really the trade of queens. After queen takes e3, rook takes e3, king to f8, and now this king can march here because the dark squares are unprotected. Black has again too many dark square problems. The king can use this path in order to activate it himself, because now after rook to c3 there's no way you can attack this pawn anymore. There are even some checkmate threats. If you leave, for instance, somehow the protection of the c8 square, you're going to be even checkmated. So that's why here bishop to c4 was played, and now this king again can use another path in order to go here to a very active square d6. This is really game over, because the only thing what we want to do is somehow push the pawn on e7, maybe play something like rook to f3 and then followed with rook to f8. So rook to b1, we have rook to f3, rook to b6 attacking the king, king to c5, rook to b7, king to d6, and again bishop to a6. But now you see rook to c1, pardon me, rook to c3 with preparations to play this very annoying check on c8. So that's why bishop to c4 had to be played, and again rook to f3, rook to a7, and now knight to c6. It's really game over here, because after rook to b7 we have now a very nice move e7. Okay, you have one check, but now after king to e5 you have to give up your rook, because the threat was of course to play rook to f8, and it's game over. So that's why rook takes e7, knight takes e7, and now rook to f6. This rook comes very active into the game. The problem is you cannot protect this pawn in the game. Bishop to e2 was played, and now Leela c0 simply plays rook to g6. If you take, of course, you cannot stop this pawn from promotion, so that's why king to d7. But now king takes d5, bishop to f3, king to e5, bishop to h5, attacking the rook. But now after rook to g7 in this position, Ethereal resigned. You lose another pawn, and it's really game over. So I think this was really a great and instructive game in the classical variation or the normal variation of the French defense, in this Steinitz variation with this white idea to play the move f4. But I think that Ethereal has played really a great game in the beginning. So first Ethereal made this mistake to play the move c takes d4, c4 was a little bit better, I think, and even after that here knight takes d4, you shouldn't, I think, make this kind of moves. Keep in mind that when you play this blocked center positions, you should always try to keep some kind of attention in the center, because when the center is attacked, that's one of the rules in chess, then it's much harder for your opponent to create on the flanks, because your opponent cannot control both sides of the board. He cannot control also the center. He cannot also control his flank attack. He cannot also control the queen side. So it's much harder when you keep the dynamics in the center for your opponent to maybe create some attacking possibilities. Keep that in mind when you want to trade off pieces in the French defense, and memorize these types of things, because they're really important, I think, in these types of positions. And this was, I think, also great gameplay by Ethereal, but also great gameplay by Leela C0. It's very instructive, I think, and we'll use now this game in our French defense series under the part 2 of this classical variation of this very nice opening. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this video. As I said, you can also watch my previous analyzed videos from the series. For the first 3 videos are a way how to play against the French defense, and then we have this very nice opening preparation. So we're continuing now also with our normal variation or the classical variation. Then after that we'll do some other exchange variation, classical, this Wiener variation, or some more. Here is the link of my French defense series, and you can also watch my King's Indian series, in which I showed you a very nice way how to play against d4. In that series I've covered more than 45 videos of this very nice opening. It's really a great tactical opening, and you can also check out my Nc3 Indian opening, in which I show you also a nice and effective way how to play against d4. And you can also subscribe to my channel if you like this content. Thanks you for watching, guys, and chess is the best, of course.